My teaching assignment this semester and next semester is teaching 65 seniors in bioengineering in their senior design projects. The engineering design process is about optimal problem solving and recognizing that for various situations there might be a solution to the problem that is this versus this, and really exploring all the potential solutions. But it really stops short of defining good problems to solve at the beginning. And so I've introduced 4 lectures about creativity. And one of the things about that, and that's why I think this $10 million should be used to find some creative new options and create seed grants that would provide proof of concept. Maybe you have an idea, you have a little bit of data, but you need a little more to provide preliminary data for funding, for a grant application. Or you have this idea, but there's no money anymore in the system to be able to be exploratory about an idea. And yeah, there's the GE, awards, things like that are very helpful, but they're very rare. So I actually think in my reading about creativity that you need to really think broadly, wildly, not filter, really test a lot of things. I actually think it should be used to foster creativity in this area with many small grants, grants that bring groups together that don't normally do things together, to really try and facilitate collaboration and innovation.
Excellent answer.
Okay, I have a few ideas I'll list. I think one is to maybe have an equivalent of an X Prize for TBI, or like the DARPA robotics prize, and come up with a way to, it's a true competition to come up with a therapy, and you could have rules, you can have competitions, you could have a therapy run by a third party with judges, and some way to make it a little more exciting too, and come up with some other ways to stimulate research. A more mundane suggestion would be, I don't know if Track TBI is doing this, is to have a U.S. brain repository. There's this. Okay, there are.
Well, yeah. Ramon's trying.
Yeah, I think. Well, I would say there's definitely a need to recreate the Glasgow experience in the U.S. Just like as in DoD, what's the problem? And maybe to have trauma samples sent out to neuropath labs and basic scientists blindly, along with other neurodegenerative diseases, to say, okay, here's some tissue. What's the problem? Diagnose this brain. What's the disease? And in a blindly fashion, maybe we could discover some new things rather than having preconceived notions of what you think TBI is. A last thing is you probably modernize our injury devices, our criminal devices. The original fluid percussion device that was published by Sullivan in 1976, that's nearly 40 years ago, and it effectively hasn't changed at all. The CCI device is over 30 years old, and there ought to be some ways that we can improve the way we produce injuries and reduce some of the noise. Maybe we can increase our effect sizes.
Our injury device is 1960.
You win.
So my first thought on seeing this question is, boy, 10 million is not nearly enough to really transform the TBI research field. But it actually would be a great situation for one individual center. And I think my advice would be to create the infrastructure and to create the culture at that institution, and that includes the good relationships between preclinical and clinical scientists. That includes a research registry. Well, not more than a registry, but where you would basically enroll people who come into your institution through the emergency room or perhaps through the clinic, collect common data elements, have this data available for junior faculty, for postdoctoral fellows, residents, and that ultimately really is going to be the creativity of those people that is going to transform the field down the line. And I think 10 million should be plenty at one institution to create that kind of culture and create that kind of infrastructure. And that's how I would spend it.
I had actually very similar thoughts that $10 million is really a pretty limited amount for the really the job that needs to be done. And I think the biggest need is in having the funding to start up projects. So I think seed funding is probably a really good way to spend that kind of limited amount of money. If I had to pick one sort of topic that I think needs the most work, and that is development of the outcome assessments, I think that's absolutely the most limiting thing for being able to go forward with clinical trials in traumatic brain injury. So.
Rory McIlroy was asked yesterday whether he was motivated by the $10 million prize should he win the tournament this weekend, and he said, "I don't really get out of bed for $10 million anymore." So we're, it's nice to have those kinds of problems. We're on the other end of the spectrum, and look, what I heard today were several talks by intramural investigators who are doing very clever and very good work. Okay, and so I would look at that pot of money as an opportunity to reinvest in local talent, and seed projects are a fantastic mechanism for that. Neurosurgery is rapidly changing, but for the moment, we're still in a position where both Jeff and I can redirect basically professional fee money back into our research infrastructures, because there's always that delta between whatever you can get from grant funding and what it really takes to keep your team together, and what it really takes to support young people, and what it really takes to just send people to meetings. There's always that delta, and we have the luxury of being able to redirect things from professional fees into that kind of stuff. That is going away. But when I think about $10 million, I think about this is an excellent mechanism for you guys to reward success intramurally. And whether it is people who bring in extramural dollars and the indirect costs from that, you match a portion of that and give it back to the investigator for discretion. I would look towards fostering the success of intramural investigators.
Great. I think that's the easy and straightforward answer, is to do that. I mean, if you're asking, and that's probably the right answer, but if you were asking me what I would do if somebody came in and gave me $10 million, probably what I would be doing is trying to figure out how I leverage that money, because $10 million isn't a lot of money. And I think that, at least in my mind, I'm absolutely convinced that as an individual investigator, I'm not going to solve this problem. I don't think that UCSF, despite all the talent that we've got there, is going to solve this problem. I don't think one of the companies that we're working with is going to solve this problem. So, what I would probably do with the money is, there's actually a lot of money running around, even though we say there's not a lot of money. I mean, we've got a couple of big grants. Bill's got a big grant. I mean, there's some big grants running around here. And while we all, I mean, you're never going to ask anybody in this room to say, well, what do you think about collaboration? Everybody's going to say, yeah, collaboration's great. The problem is we're all so damn busy, we don't have time to collaborate. And probably what we need beyond collaboration is coordination. And so I would take some of this money to try to coordinate some of the existing efforts to make sure that we're not working off in our own little silos and reinventing the wheel at our various places, and get a little bit more communication. I mean, just what you're doing today. I mean, we all came here because of the people that put this meeting on, but we also came here, I think, to get a chance to, share ideas with people. I mean, we want to do this, and so I think you could leverage the existing resources with some money to sort of facilitate coordination of what's going on. And then probably what I would do with another chunk of this money is, and again, this is my personal opinion, I would figure out how to take a chunk of this money and do some more advocacy and do some, basically some lobbying, because I think one of the things that we're going to have that we're never going to get any further on, we don't have any TBI disease centers. So we talked about building a registry. We talked about having a place where we could look at biomarkers and things like that. Alzheimer's disease centers, Parkinson's disease centers, cancer centers. I mean, it's not surprising that all these people came together because somebody in Congress provided infrastructure that allowed us to take care of patients and to do research on them at the same time. And I'm worried that we're never going to be able to do what the cardiologist did with troponin with this lack of infrastructure right now. So I guess what I would do is I would try to get all these great people here that seem to like working together and will work together a little bit better coordinated, and then try to really get a big return on the investment for everybody by really trying to get some more infrastructure behind what we're trying to do.
Well said, Jeff. There we go. Thank you. Sounds like a loaves and fish problem here. That $10 million indeed is very, very modest. And put it in perspective, I don't know if you any read the report this week that was coming out of Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal, where sovereign wealth funds are actually coming together to develop a portfolio to target specific features of cancer for efficacious therapy. And they've estimated they have to raise $30 billion. So, I assume that to really make major progress in traumatic brain injury, we're not far behind. But that having been said, $10 million, and what I would like to see, despite all the problems, having been in this field for over 40 years, I think the progress we made is phenomenal. I think when we first started, and I laughed on Becker and I, our singular belief that, traumatic brain injury was all elevated ICP, and if you control ICP, the patient would walk out of the intensive care unit perfectly normal. Everyone laughs at that story, but it shows how primitive we were 40 years ago. So we've advanced. But with advancement, we've also, I think, made a lot of discovery, which now has sort of been thrown along the wayside. And I would like to revisit some of the preclinical discovery we've done. I'd like to see it done in terms of combinational therapy. And I'd like to see it perhaps done on the Operation Brain Trauma. We talked about that, but perhaps one lower animal model, one higher order animal model with all the endpoints we talked about, imaging, biomarkers, and the therapies, the low-hanging fruit still out there are the remarkably protective effects. I don't see Ed. Is Ed Hall here? Oh, he's on. Thank you, Ed. You see, his hour's getting late. Yeah, but the radical scavenger issues, I think, are still very low-hanging fruit in the context of traumatic brain injury. Dave is talking about the problems with hypothermia and rewarming, but it's been shown again and again that if indeed in animal models, if radical scavengers are on board, they obviate all the radical-mediated pathobiology associated with rewarming. So, I would love to do these types of combinational approaches, the mitochondrial protectants, and either individually or in combination in these higher-order animal models that are very homologous with comparable endpoints, we may be able to really make some major advances in what's working and not working, and then push on a new generation of studies. So, Ed, I'm sorry I misplaced you.
First of all, several people have said that $10 million is not a lot of money. $10 million is a hell of a lot of money for me. So I think for a single family to be generous enough to provide that is a tremendous opportunity. They told me once that the building I'm in at the University of Kentucky, which was opened in 2005, they said if somebody donated $5 million, that would be their building. They'd have their name all over it. So $10 million ought to be worth that. But I want to just share very quickly with our experience in Kentucky with something called the Kentucky Spinal Cord and Head Injury Research Trust, which has been in existence for 20 years. It was started by a state senator from Louisville who had a niece who sustained a high school age niece who sustained a spinal cord injury in an automobile accident. And while she was being treated at the University of Louisville, not at the University of Kentucky, but at the University of Louisville, the state senator asked the neurosurgeon, said, well, what is being done in the state of Kentucky to address this terrible problem of spinal cord injury that my niece is facing? And he said, well, not much. Well, Senator Shaughnessy, who was responsible for this, went back to the legislature and pushed through a bill to create the Kentucky Spinal Cord and Head Injury Research Trust, test, which was initially based on a $12.50 surcharge that you would pay if you got a speeding ticket in Kentucky. Later on, he went back and was able to get it such that the fund takes in 6.5% of Kentucky court costs. But anyway, that fund at its peak generated about $3 million a year. And about half of the money is given out in small grants, maximum $100,000 per year, maximum 3 years, and awards each year. And we in the University of Louisville, by the way, they expanded it to include traumatic brain injury, but it's spinal cord and head injury. Your money is able to be focused just on the problem of TBI, and you're only one institution. You don't have to share it with another institution, as I understand it. So I did a little math, and I don't necessarily like investing things. It's tempting to spend that money initially, but if you invested the $10 million, and if you got a 5% return a year, which I realize with the volatility of the market, who knows, but that would generate for you $500,000, and each year you could award 5 $100,000 grants for pilot projects, whether clinically focused or basic science focused, with the idea that those would help jumpstart the ability of particularly young investigators to get extramural funding from DOD or NIH. So that's one thought that I have. But I think there's some wonderful science going on here. There are other ways. I like some of the other points that have been made, but that would be one way. As I understand it, this is $10 million one time. So it's not. Okay, so it's going to go on like that.
It's a theoretical question.
Okay. And anyway, and once a year they have a grant competition in Kentucky, and we submit grants on August 1st, and then this guy and this guy and this guy who've been on the board that reviews those grants, they're tough cookies sometimes, but anyway, it's something that has really, really blessed us at the University of Kentucky and our friends at the University of Louisville. So anyway.
Very good.
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, to run a center or to run a laboratory today in the United States, especially in academic, you have to have a diversified portfolio. And we have recently lost John James. We've lost other leaders in the field, and we need to invest some money somehow into places like the University of Michigan, like other universities, to attract young people to get started so that they can have their activities supported. And that can be done either the way that Dr. Paul described in terms of small grants, or you could set up a center or a foundation that's going to be supported, say, within this institution that would attract young people to the field. And what I'm worried about as I get older and look back on the students that I see going through UCLA, very few of them are going into academics, much less in traumatic brain injury. So we have to make this more of an inviting and safe place for people to conduct research and teaching. And I don't think it necessarily has to go to all the people that have already been successful. It should go to the younger people and for education and awareness.
Okay, well, thank you for letting me think about this. And hear everyone else's suggestions, which are all very good. Those are my notes. But anyway, so I think, a lot of great suggestions, but I think I would spend the money on, and maybe put it all the first year or do something that Ed suggested, being on pilot grants. And the vision, in my project, we have about 10 basic scientists that allow us to think about neuroscience at the basis and what's happening, at the neuroscience meetings and things like that. And we have a mentoring program where we basically hook up that very basic scientist with someone that's interested in traumatic brain injury or spinal cord injury. So together, those two individuals come up with some visionary questions that are certainly related to neurotrauma, but also are utilizing the state-of-the-art technology and tools that we pick up each year at the neuroscience meeting, for example. So I think with that particular strategy, although we have a lot of smart people in neurotrauma and doing some really exciting stuff, I think at the same time there's a huge field in the neurosciences where we're understanding even more about how the nervous system works. And with that information, I think those are the type of questions that we could actually take to the neurotrauma field. So I think a pilot grant, which people have talked about before, with a mentoring program between established neurotrauma researchers and someone outside the field that's really just thinking about basic neuroscience with tools and technologies that are out there and are very exciting that sometimes we don't have ability to utilize or understand, I think would really bring some new information to the field, and it would help us from the bottom up, if you will, not so much the top down. But anyway, that's just what I'm thinking about, and it certainly has helped us increase some of our grant support in terms of innovation and things like that. So that's something I would utilize it for.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those excellent recommendations. Now I'm going to challenge you a little bit, and I'm going to challenge both the panel and the audience because those were all very well-established, tried and true mechanisms of investing in research. But I want to challenge you to think about if you can come up with a use of that resource that has never been done before. Either the panel or the audience, how you might use that resource to invest in research or transform the research enterprise in a way that you have never heard or known of been done before.
Johnny Seaback, University of Kentucky, now Lincoln Memorial University. So one of the things that I caught from the panel are all very like altruistic type of situations, but as all of you are very aware, if there's no money, there's no research, and I think a clever way to utilize $10 million is for the investment of creating an autonomous money allowance. And what I mean by that is a mechanism that can be self-sustaining. And so that it's a little complex and nebulous, but where I'm going with this is that if you recruit individuals and you pay them, they're going to present novel ideas for ways in which money can be reinvested to grow. So, for instance, if you get 20 different people in the room and all of them have different backgrounds and you have a convergence of those ideas, then someone may present to the table how they could, bump up that money by 5% and then reinvest that, maybe somehow increase that amount of money through just typical business reinvestments, which could potentially be used for lobbying to sway maybe big pharma incentives, maybe temporary tax incentives to get them on board, or additional crowdfunding. But what I'm trying to get at is that the ideas for this problem, I think, are beyond the confines of this room. And if you recruit others that have very diverse backgrounds, you'll have a bigger mixing pot of ideas. Frequency hopping.
So I think your idea actually has is a very clever kernel, and one of the problems with spending other people's money is you eventually run out of other people's money. And so what you're describing is how do you convert this in? Part of the problem for all of us is that none of what we do is a product. We're not Apple. No one's coming up to buy what it is that we do. However, we did hear today about modalities that are being pursued for intellectual property protection and potentially commercialization. So when I hear what you're describing, what it makes me think of is you can use this kind of money to actually be the seed for spin-off companies, and you can make it a venture capital fund where all you need is one win, and you'll get your money back and then some for the 19 losers that you will also have to fund. So that's actually an outside the box and clever thought, is to use $10 million as venture capital. I mean, this space is ripe for tools and technologies that bring solutions to patients. And frankly, if you can carve it out, and if the dollar sign's big enough, you know, I won't give my ideas to the University of Pittsburgh anymore. I withhold my best ideas for myself, and then I figure out a way to go and go outside the confines of things, and then I come back and I say, whoops, you know what I just did is I just did this, now how do you want to handle it? Because if I go to them first, then they steal it from me. This is the indentured servitude of the modern university. And so if you can carve out a mechanism where you are saying, in this space, we are the tech transfer office for the University of Michigan, not you. And the payoff to the institution is that if the more successful you are, the more it is going to be reflective of the success of the University of Michigan environment. And any university that's worth its salt right now is doing what Carnegie Mellon is doing in Pittsburgh, which is cleaning the clock of the University of Pittsburgh by, you know, having its soldiers purchased by Uber to go and make their driverless cars, while the University of Pittsburgh still thinks it's 1975 and that they own me. And you too.
So I actually think that Johnny said something that I think is also interesting in terms of a multiplier effect. And that is, I'm old enough to remember the Jerry Lewis telethon kind of thing, and Kickstarter is our modern, and there can be an annual drive that is a match, because the number of individuals in this country that have been touched by traumatic brain injury, either to themselves, family members, or others they know, if Congress isn't willing to represent the populace's belief that we need to make a difference in this area, maybe this money could be used in a manner that actually grows it, but from the, not through selling it, you know, IP and marketing a device, but actually reaching more broadly to raise that money again and again, annually, like the telephone.
Excellent idea. Kevin.
So as the innovation chief for the medical school here, I would have to disagree. We do it really well here, so I don't think any of our faculty feel like indentured servants, and we actually have an innovation program which gives out actually large aliquots of funding to do innovation and product development. So we won't send. And
how much do you give back how much do you give back to the investigators?
30 to 40%.
Oh yeah,
okay?
That's awesome.
Well, but again, right. But again, what you're getting in return in terms of you know, facilities and all. I mean, all that really has to be considered. It's not cheap. This is why your university charges 60%. You know, indirect rates. This is just an issue. But, you know, in terms of investing in the companies and things like that. So anyway, we won't send this film to your university. But, but anyway,
I'm all over the radar.
Yeah, so, yeah.
It's on Twitter. It's
yeah,
been tweeted.
so,
I'm on his defense team.
Yeah, all right. But there should be there can be I think a happy medium. But anyway, you know, a measure of success, of course, is always to put ourselves out of business, right? And so, but you know, because of the TBI landscape, and maybe children and isolated TBI head injury is not a part of this comment. But you know, I wonder if part of the answer here is really things like autonomous vehicles. Okay, so we haven't heard anything about prevention, basically. So if you know, the majority of complex TBI that we have to accept may be an intractable problem, then if you were going to give $10 million to a policy group, health policy group to investigate, my gut feeling is what they would say is all your money needs to go into prevention. So let's go into Google. So I'm just interested to know what your comments are.
So, but the data that we saw this morning from Walter is that most of it is false. So your driverless cars.
Most of it is what?
False.
Falls rather
yeah.
than
Falls.
Oh, falls.
Falls.
I don't know. I mean, practicing emergency medicine for 30 years, the vast majority of bad TBI that we see is associated
you're talking
with
about bad
blood.
TBI.
Yeah. Well, of course, I'm talking
but
about
bad acutely. I mean, I think the thing is it falls in the elderly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of data that showed that the elderly have twice the
Well,
hospitalization rate.
well, I understand that, but let's look at the numerator and denominator and the cost, and the fact that the majority of these, when we start talking about concomitant injuries, and especially with younger folks, and the productive years of life lost, it's generally multi-system trauma, blunt trauma, that causes these problems, right? And so again, you got to be sort of careful what you wish for, but I do think the group as a whole, if we meet again, we have to sort of embrace what are some of the prevention things that can mitigate the severe disease we see that we call TBI.
Yeah, but I would argue if you look at the data, the amount of severe TBI in the United States has fallen exponentially for the very reasons you cite: alcohol abuse issues, passive restraints, speed control. Compared to where it was when we started, it is significantly reduced.
Yeah.
The societal problem is milder injury and the morbidity it brings, not as overt, but people that have behavioral problems, all the types of post-traumatic stress disorders, etc. And those, in many cases, are not that easily avoidable. I mean, a simple fall, a sporting-related accident, are we going to ban all contact sports? That gets a little bit more dicey than what you're alluding to in the more severe end of the spectrum.
Yeah, in the state of California, a good example, just an example, a helmet law. Very simple law. If you're going to ride a bicycle, you're going to ride a motorcycle, you're going to wear a helmet. The millions of dollars that were put in for that legislation to get that through was unbelievable. And then it got overturned. And then it had to be reinvested. And it's sort of like when you were in medical school and took a medical ethics class of prevention of, say, car accidents. Would you put your money into guardrails, or would you put your money into a different monitor in the intensive care unit? Where are you going to get your biggest bang for your buck? And I am all for prevention. I mean, I think it's great to try to do this. What I'm worried about is the same thing that John alluded to, is that the amount of head injury in this country, I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but in this country is starting to decline for severe and moderate head injuries. Mild head injuries are continuing to go. It wasn't until 2009 that the NFL said that concussions happen in the National Football League. In 2010, with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I was informed that mild traumatic brain injury doesn't happen in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, this is how far back we are in terms of this. So you could take that money and say, okay, we're going to push this envelope to get more awareness out there. So then this $10 million gets dumped in with another $10 million or another $10 million from some other places, and they all try to put it together. I think you've got an opportunity here to actually make a small difference in an institution, say an intramural institution, which can attract young people and can advance science without the great risk of having to have all their experiments work. So they can actually try novel things. Put it, as you pointed out, you have an award that you give for people that try new things, and then they get paid back. In California, for example, even though Jeff Manley may not know this, it's against these University of California guidelines for us to lobby. So I can't lobby the state of California on behalf of head injury. It's against the school guidelines for us to do that. So I don't know what it is in the state of Michigan.
Well, I think you guys from Pittsburgh and California, you guys need to just move to the University of Michigan. We're a little more lax.
We can buy a lot of airline tickets. Transfer. He's also part of the recruiting office.
Yes. We can support a lot of airline tickets and moving vans.
Yeah. I'd just like to just comment on a couple of things. When I first got into this field, a lot of the money was going to the CDC for prevention and so on. And I just don't think we're going to prevent all kinds of TBI. Even in my lifetime, I saw us go from, restraints to airbags, and then we got the telephones. And so the telephones distracted people even with this. And so then we went hands-free, and the minute we went hands-free, we started texting. And not only are we starting to text, but we're actually texting walking down the street. And I see a lot of trauma in San Francisco with all of our high-tech buddies, flipping over and falling onto the street. And I think that the falls in the elderly and the impact of this is every bit as profound as what's happening with stroke and with Alzheimer's and so on. So coming from a severe TBI background, I've been very moved at the level of what the impact of these milder forms of injury are on these individuals. It's not trivial, and I think that it seemed to us as we were putting the Track TBI grant together that we had to make a very clear and objective argument about that, which is why we brought on a health economist group, to help us look at this, and we're collecting all kinds of health economic information and find out about people's assets and find out when do they go back to work and how are they being supported by their employers and so on. And I think we're going to find that this is a lot worse than we think it is because we've never asked those questions. And we'll see what happens over time.
So we ask the young people, the proteges, the mentees to come here for a reason, because they often have very fresh ideas and think about ways that people that have been in the field for a long time don't think about it. So I'd like to have a few of our guest invitees to come to the microphone and give us some ideas of how you might invest this in the infrastructure for TBI research, or what you'd like to see happen.
Well, what I would say is, having finished residency just 2 short years ago, the number of my colleagues that are interested in TBI are small and I think shrinking, and that's despite having Jeff, who's one of the more magnetic people in our department. I wasn't thinking about a trauma career when I started residency or even when I was halfway through it. So I think, at least in the neurosurgery world, TBI is it's not as sexy as, clipping a basilar aneurysm or some other big glioblastoma kind of surgery. But I mean, let's face it, the TBI patients live and the GBM patients all die. So we actually have the chance to make a difference here. So what I'm saying is, I think mentorship is critical. And your generation has lost John Jane, my generation lost Andy Parsa. There are great mentors out there who I think we need more of, and $10 million in helping to mentor young faculty and residents I think would be able to go a very long way, because those are people who I like to think have shown some potential, and with a little bit of extra help could maybe achieve more.
I'd like to speak to that. I think that's a very excellent point. Every year at our institution, I'm asked by the chair of neurosurgery when they bring in the residency candidates in the fall that I will talk to them about the Spinal Cord and Brain Injury Research Center there. And they'll typically bring 7, 8 to as many as 10 of these residents in. They'll have to listen to me for 20 minutes about all the great work we're doing. And they all sit there like, you got any questions? So I mean, it just reinforces what you're saying. I mean, it's clear that we aren't getting David Okonkwo's and Jeff Manley's coming out of neurosurgery training who want to focus on this very significant problem. So I think your point about trying to enhance, provide some incentive for that among young neurosurgeons as well as young emergency medicine trainees is very important.
Okay, I know I'm going to.
No one cares about a neurologist. I mean, I think
Ramon, that's not true.
exists.
That's not true.
No,
I love neuro. In fact, the best compliment I ever get is people like, "You're in neurology, right?" And I say, "Yes, I am." It's I take that as a compliment, Ramon.
No, but I mean, I think the very same problem exists, probably even more so within neurologists, which is appalling, particularly on the mild end of the spectrum. I mean, that's primarily, that's never going to be surgical. And once they leave the hospital, if they're hospitalized, they're going to be managed, in most cases, in outpatient setting. I think it's really a scandal that relatively little. It's much better than it used to be, but still a real gap.
So I know I'm going to regret this, but the technology is where I would put it in toys. I mean, I think that right now we're seeing, especially for the adolescent population, we're seeing a boom in the obsessive computer infiltration into their lives. But to utilize that to our advantage in the education component. So blast them with tweets. We could probably get Dr. Giza to be a professional tweeter to all of them. But, you know, infiltrate them with news about TBI because they're not getting that from when they're children. A lot of PBS and news advertisements on televisions and children's networks and things like that are really geared towards getting that message out to kids, but TBI doesn't have that. And then all the way from that level to the laboratory, we need to get some of these young, excited engineers interested in circuitries of the future, biomaterials that we can actually utilize to integrate into the brain, to actually utilize it to then read neurochemical values, EEGs, things like that, that we can actually play with the data in the lab. Right now, we're having to sort of reinvent some of that stuff as we go. So technology development across the board would be a very exciting way of bringing people from computer programming backgrounds, engineering departments, all into neuroscience to keep that TBI population continually evolving into a future direction.
So how do you get them to come?
Blast out a tweet. That is the challenge right now, and I think that you have to start inspiring them. At least, I teach neuro anatomy to the undergrads, and when you teach them just the neuro, it's not as exciting. When you throw in there infiltrations of some of the deep brain stimulation that we're doing, some of the live surgeries that we're doing, some of the new technologies that are coming for spinal cord circuitry innovation, then all of a sudden they start seeing the possibilities, and then I think you can start to lure them into the laboratory. I think using some of it to have innovative, creative competitions is a great idea, as Dr. Margulies brought up, because that is a good way to make some of those barriers between the fields really disappear. And they are starting to dissipate anyway. But I really think that we have to integrate the technology and actually ask for what we want to be built. Force them to kind of help us come up with solutions, technically. That would make our job easier.
Excellent.
Okay, I sort of have a bit of a comment to go off of what you started, Dr. Prinz. I guess I have a sort of really zany idea and a less zany idea. The really zany idea is we should buy commercial spots in really popular entertainment medium to get the general population throughout the United States more interested in research, and particularly TBI research, and sort of, be the Coca-Cola, as it were, and sort of get really popular shows, Empire, Walking Dead, things like that, and get them to sort of help us have the general population have a more positive
You
outlook
mean
on
embedding.
science.
You don't mean buying the commercial spots during the commercials. But
No,
you're talking about
I mean
embedding in the show.
yes,
Yeah.
a subliminal
You give the
commercial.
producers of Empire $2 million to write in a character.
Essentially, that really shows the
far more effective.
positive aspects of science to then get the general population more interested in supporting Congress in funding research and giving more money to the NIH. That's the really zany idea. The less zany idea is to use the money to develop an infrastructure that we can hopefully combine with the Neurotrauma Society to make a really big national society that would rival, the cancer societies and the MS Society, where we can do things like lobby in Congress, and we can also fund research, but then also put on meetings and things like that, but have a non-NIH entity where you can also go to get big funding.
Excellent. We have many more young minds here.
I think kind of building off that idea of investment into something that then generates future return. One of the, for all the talks that were given today, there was only one talk on actually synthesizing all the data that is being generated by all these individual people. And through, you know, I forgot the sort of catch term of it, but a data architect or an analytics architect. But basically that, if you can use this money for seed grants to inspire those people, just as, you know, Facebook is a multi-billion-dollar company that's built off of nothing. That all it is a data collection machine. Same with Google. All of these things are just taking data that's already floating around, and we're already monitoring people. We're already, all these different animal models are already collecting so many different sets. And some of the problems with the idea that we've even, you know, broken it down to mild and moderate and, you know, good outcome versus poor outcome, it's because we haven't had the ability to analyze multi-modality, you know, all these different multifactorial, just dealing with the volume of data points. And so if you can inspire individuals, and through what inspires so many individuals, especially those that are working for Google and everything else, is the dollar. And so it's finding a way of drawing those individuals, allowing them to then carry that money forward and develop their own ideas and hold on to what's generated from that. That would be the most useful in using both things that we have and things that we can build going forward.
Excellent suggestion. All right, anybody else? What, so I had one more question because we do have 10 minutes left. What about unique ways of partnering with industry, right? So we see how, you know, we heard about trying to get Big Pharma back into the business. There's also, you know, companies related to technology devices, companies like Apple, IBM, that are out there that are doing, you know, have capabilities in terms of monitoring and analytics. And, you know, how could, in sort of the academic world of traumatic brain injury research, what are some unique and different ways we might think about engaging industry in this research enterprise?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing we can start doing is stop whining, right? No, because I mean, I think in fact it is true that we've made gigantic progress, and John and Ed. I mean, you guys have been there for. I mean, I've been in there a pretty long time myself, not quite as long as you guys, and it is quite remarkable how much progress we've made, right? And I think when we're always, it's happened in meetings like this, you know. GCS is crap, GOSE is crap, outcome measures are no good, biomarkers, I mean, you know, it's not totally true, and even if it were, we could maybe spin it a little different way, right? I think when a biotech company or the Pfizers and Novartis of this world hear that, they say, oh, those bunch of losers, we don't need to be investing in these people, which is not quite the case. We're not really that much worse off than the Alzheimer's or Parkinson's world, actually. So I think that's one thing you can start doing like right away. Just whenever you hear your mind going into one of these automatic programs, just hold back and say, you know, we really have made a lot of progress. We've got stuff to do, but we have a plan on how to get there, and there's a future to this.
I think that we have really turned the corner in the last 3 or 4 years, in particular, where because we have learned from history, we are getting a lot smarter and more clever about this, and we are in fact really starting to see industry partners come back. The same ones that left 10, 12 years ago are slowly making their way back. And you know, when Jeff puts together these things related to the TED initiative or related to Track TBI, I mean, you can look, these guys are lining up now. They're showing up and they're saying, we want to hear what you guys are up to. We know there's an energy that is building, and we don't want to be late when it's time for us to strike. So your point is very well taken, Ramon. You know, it's important for scientists to be their own worst critics.
Just not in public.
Just amongst friends.
Yeah, and I just want to respond to that. I think that somebody told me from the outside that we probably did more critical self-assessment than most other disease groups out there, because there were a lot of other disease groups that had just as many miserable failures as we had, and they still think they know how to do it. So I think it's like any good 12-step program. The first thing you have to do is admit that you got a problem. And so I think that's what we do around here, is that we've admitted that we've got a problem. And so I don't want you to think that, we're talking about these things in front of companies, because I think that we actually have recognized that we have a problem, and now we're trying to fix it rather than thinking that we still know how to do something that we don't know how to do. I think the reason why we keep on talking about this to some degree is that, we still have people that still think that we can keep on doing what we've done for the last 30 years and they're going to get a different result, which I don't think most of us believe. But I think there's several ways to engage companies. They understand what the market here is. And they, in particular, and you're hearing a lot of mild TBI talk coming from down at this end of the table, they know exactly what those numbers are, and those numbers are huge, and those are the kind of numbers that build a business model around a biomarker or a treatment. And I think that whatever we learn in that population is going to feed back into the severe TBI. The monotherapies that are developed in these more homogeneous phenotypes are going to basically feed back into combination therapy into the sicker patients. But I think the first thing that really has to happen, and we've all been, I think, guilty of this, is not understanding how the FDA works. The FDA is a very, very complicated place with a whole different, as we know now, a whole different set of definitions, a whole different requirement for data that is completely unlike the requirement for data that we have in our world. And I think even for junior investigators who are doing basic science work, you need to understand the FDA process if you hope that anything ever is going to come to the bedside. So I think one of the ways that we're getting, as David said, we are getting a lot of corporate engagement now from name brand, large capitalized companies. And the reason why this is happening is that, one, I think that they know that we're trying to make a difference and trying to do this in a different way. I think they also understand that we're trying to understand how the FDA works, so that's their vehicle to make sure that they can turn something in. So what I would say the biggest thing to do is, Ramon's right, have a positive face, because I'll just share one thing with you. Here we've been talking and beating ourselves up here a little bit today, but we've made tremendous progress. I mean, where we are today versus where we were even 7 or 8 years ago is a phenomenal sea change of culture and thought. That's hard to do. You can change a lot of things, but to change the way people are thinking isn't an easy thing to do. And so I really think that we are making a tremendous amount of progress. And so Alzheimer's, who many of us look to as all the money that they have and all the things that they do, some of our colleagues have shown us where all the Alzheimer's trials that were done, each one of them did the mini mental status exam a different way. So even these big famous well-funded investigators are making mistakes too. And so I think it's good that we've recognized them. It is time to move on, but you've got to learn about the FDA if you want to speak the language of bringing a company in to really help them to move along with that.
I would just say that there's a difference between bringing in Big Pharma again for multi-centered trials, clinical trials. Those of us that do both basic and clinical research, if you do basic research, a lot of companies are using universities as their R&D, their research and development, and in order to attract more investment into their company. And so they're using your laboratory as their R&D for that. And through many years of getting in bed and out of bed and back in bed with companies, I have come up with UCLA, we can come up with a formula where if a company wants to design a study for them in order to try their particular pharmacology treatment or their monitoring treatment in the animal studies in the basic science lab, then we charge them a fee for designing that study right up front. And then afterwards, then they go to the university and they say, okay, well, we want to give you a grant, but we don't want to give you the indirect costs. We just want to give you a gift. So they can give you a gift, but again, I guess it's a problem with the University of California. If they give us a gift, then they can't tell us what to do with the money. And they also don't want you to publish it until they get a chance to look at it. And if it's negative data, they don't want you to publish it. And so we've got faculty members that are trying, as John pointed out earlier in the day, that we got faculty members that are trying to get promoted and they're trying to get publications. So you have to have the right to publish this material. You have to be careful which company you address. And so, but with the big clinical trials, that's where the Big Pharma made its big input many, many years ago, and that's when we lost them. And that's where we need to get them back. And so my approach has always been to put on a very positive face. We have done a lot. We've done an enormous amount. But my job or my goal is to fix traumatic brain injury, mild or severe. That's what I want to do. My goal is not to make this particular startup company successful. My goal is to fix traumatic brain injury. Now, if that startup company is willing to work with me with regards to gifts and indirect costs and whatnot, and I can see that that would go towards a clinical trial and would help, and I can't agree more. More basic scientists need to understand how the FDA works. Could contribute to that, then I'm willing to roll the dice with it. But otherwise, I'm a little more cautious.
Yeah, we work pretty closely with pharmaceutical companies, and basically I follow what Dave just said. If I'm interested in what their product is, and it relates to the neuroscience that I'm interested in doing, and it relates to neurotrauma, spinal cord injury, or TBI, I certainly have a nice discussion with them. And we've gotten several STTR grants, SBIR grants, and that has helped fund the research with the long-term vision. If we can help them move things forward, they're going to be the group that's going to allow to pay for the clinical trial. So I think that's going to be good for our field. So Medtronic has stepped forward with that brain-computer interface, and they're contributing their processors, 50,000 apiece. So that's very good. And I think all of us scientists and clinicians have to think about IP. We've started our own small company that seems to be moving forward, and we're venture capitalists are coming now, and I think it's all directed toward neurotrauma. So I think there's a lot of excitement right now. J&J has come forward, and as someone mentioned already, they're using universities now to actually do the research. And I think if you have a nice, if it's a good company, you can negotiate IP and things of this nature with them. So that's what we're doing more and more, because they're not going to put forward all the research infrastructure they need to actually do these particular studies. So I think that's actually changing. And so I think they're our friends, and I think they can help us pay for some of these very, very expensive trials if we can't get the funding through NIH.
I think we're getting just a bit off the beam. I think if we build it, they will come, and they being the drug companies and technology companies. But I feel strongly, as has been voiced by others on this panel, that one of the best things you can do is invest in young people to attract them to the field, provide startup money for them, to provide pilot grants so they can get preliminary data to go out and get big money. And then as they build their programs, come up with new therapeutic ideas, and then, if you build it, they will come.
I think that's a great comment to close out the panel session on. If you build it, they will come. And we will take all that advice here, and I think we will bring that back to the Massey family as well.